Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month we continue discussing Holding On to Hope, tribute to Recovery Month and Suicide Prevention Week. I know those together don't really sound very hopeful, but I would disagree because sometimes it takes the most courage to simply say, I will try again tomorrow. Recovery comes in all shapes and sizes, and I have a guest today. Has no stranger. She's a returning guest, and she's a friend. Thank you, Juliet, for coming and sharing your insight with us today.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back.
Well, I want to share with those who are watching and listening that disclaimer: if you are in crisis, please seek appropriate professional help immediately. The crisis hotline is 1-800-273-8255. It's National Suicide Prevention and Lifeline. I know that there's many who watch outside the country, so I just want to ask that encourage, I would say, to those listening to find what's available in your area. I know that, like I said before, recovery and support comes in all shapes and sizes. I'm going to start off with a quote, Juliet, as always, because I always know someone said it better than I did. And it's Napoleon Bonaparte, but we're just going to go there. It says, courage isn't having the strength to go on. It's going on when you don't have strength. I think biblically, faith-wise, I've heard this many times spoken in different ways from Paul. But what comes to mind when you hear this quote when it comes to recovery and holding on to hope, Juliet?
Well, when we're at the end of our rope, that's when we really discover who we are and what we're made of. But sometimes it's really important who's cheering for us and who's on our bus.
Yes.
Sometimes we've got nobody because our own choices, our addiction has burned all our bridges, and we're just at the absolute bottom. But from the bottom we can rise, and there are so many stories of hope and looking at other people who have overcome, who have chosen at the last minute not to commit suicide, who have chosen to come out of their addiction. Those stories can encourage us and give us hope, even if we're at the very, very end of our rope.
Yeah, and I really do agree, especially just the connection portion of it. I was reading about addiction, and there's various studies that the opposite of sobriety, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is connection. It was
That's
kind of
right.
this weird. It's because a lot of times we think of these only if statements. I shouldn't do this. I should, but there's a lot more depth, and I want to go into this one quote, just quote after quote, but this one actually speaks to me a bit. It says, everyone needs a house to live in, but a supportive family is what builds a home. There is a difference between a house and a home.
Absolutely.
What comes to mind? I want to hear your side of it, and I'll share mine.
Well, I think we've touched on this at some point in the past, but family can be bio or family can be chosen.
Yes.
And I had a friend once when I was going through a really challenging time, and he just said to me, surround yourself with good people. And sometimes we have to choose who we're going to let into our lives, who's going to be our new family. If our family of origin isn't healthy, if we have something that's keeping us isolated from them, we choose. We all thrive in the atmosphere of unconditional love and acceptance.
Yes.
And compassion for us as humans is just so healing. And when we have people, that's the difference between a house and a home. When we have people who are compassionate and loving toward us, we can thrive and heal.
I feel like it's when you have those moments, just enjoyable moments, maybe you're going out with some new friends, it's nice. But what really solidifies, that relationship is what happens when you have that bad day. Are they there? Are they supportive? Family at the same run can play a role in recovery. A lot of times, impact can act like a ripple effect. Unfortunately, families are not always homes. A lot of times, they're just a house. Um,
Right.
why do you feel environment gets overlooked in recovery? It's like, a lot of times there's just, it's just it gets minimized. Like what you're describing, this positive aspect, being surrounded by positive people. A lot of times it gets minimized. It's like the environment's not important. It's what you do, what you choose not to do. Why do you think environments gets overlooked?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure why,
Mm-hmm.
but I do know that environment is absolutely key,
Mm-hmm.
and we can get triggered into dysfunctional cycles by being in environments um, that have not been healthy for us in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, choosing to place ourselves in an environment where we feel safe, where we feel heard, where we feel loved, um, where we are surrounded by people and things that are different than something that used to trigger us to act out or to make choices, that get us back in that loop.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really key. So when people are coming out of, um, for example, rehab, um,
Mm-hmm.
they're asked to avoid the environment that triggered them to use. They're asked to find a new place. But
Yeah.
sometimes, that's the only place they have to go. And so they go back to that environment and end up in that same cycle again. So environment is totally key
Mm-hmm.
to recovery.
Yeah. And along the same kind of line, I was gonna ask you, these two questions. I know they're kind of open ended, but this one question, but it's kind of full one. It says, "What have you seen that work for families in recovery, and what have you seen not work?" I know it's different, and it's only through the scope of what you've seen personally. In regards to environment and in regards to recovery, what have you seen worked and what doesn't, Juliet?
Well, what doesn't work is that definition of insanity,
Yeah.
doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Yeah.
You know,
I
that
think I was told different one time. I think there's another quote that very similar. It says, don't expect to solve your problems with the same mindset that brought you to that problem." You get what I'm saying? So it's
that's
kind of
it.
this weird
That
kind of or
that
something.
totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mean, that doesn't work. I think what works is healthy boundaries
Yes.
set in love
Hmm.
and an atmosphere of compassion and community. That works. There's a psychiatrist. His name is Gabriel Mate, and um, he works with trauma and addiction. He actually says all addiction is rooted in trauma,
Hmm.
and that we ask the wrong question. We ask what's wrong with you when we should be asking what happened to you.
Yeah.
And he has seen so many wonderful stories of healing and recovery um, through um, an atmosphere of love and compassion, because he listens to and identifies with and has compassion on the person as a human being, not
Hmm.
just as an addict, but as a human being who has had something very traumatic happen to them.
Yeah. It's now with my new job that I've been working since April. One thing I've noticed is um, there's a question that I ask is, what social economic status do you think you are? And I'm not going by what's on paper. I want their perception, and it's pretty interesting because you begin to find out a lot of what you're talking about. Why do you do what you do? What, like, what happened, asking that question, because a lot of times it's just not being heard is one of them, and it's a general statement, but there's a lot more context, a lot more. That's why recovery is messy. And I do like that we're addressing it, not a bunch of shouldn'ts. That doesn't work because it's not very
Right.
personable, and it's like you're like 10 feet away. At the same time, all of us all of us struggle, and all of us have like short-term memories sometimes of how it might feel, and sometimes we just have to get to the derivative of it all. Why did I start being addicted? Because I was lonely, because there was no one there, because I was at my worst and no one helped me. I'm not saying those are good reasons, but at the same time, you kind of understand that maybe there was even, you go even deeper, there might be even more things that they don't even discover themselves, which leads me to purpose driven recovery. I read a little bit about this, but also I do find it kind of blends well when you kind of look, when I incorporate some of my faith, but also understanding that asking the question why. Why do you do what you do? I find the combination of those words together help me, and those who are struggling to ask the question. Like I said, why, I'm going to ask you, but while you're thinking about it, Julia, because it's a big question. Why do you do what you do? Why do you advocate, or why are you so um why is recovery so important to you, kind of question. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to share a little story illustration that is personal to me, but it was, I never thought about it, but I thought it was a great illustration. While I was serving in the military, the workload was very taxing. It was right at the cusp of 9/11, around that time. I needed to be shaped to stay awake during work, and obviously, bad habits arose during that period. One being nicotine. I remember people having I remember thinking back and thinking even now, how much we have the ability to lie to ourselves.
Hmm.
After leaving the military, I felt I could only produce high quality performance by taking it upon myself to use nicotine, because I thought it kept me sharp. You know, I was, but I was not working the same intensity of work. But I lied to myself and justified it within myself. Values stemmed deep in all of this, but the point is, my value was being productive. It was not being Robert. It equated on a quick fix that I was used to, I was comfortable with, and and even in the context, it didn't match. So that was a lie that I was sharing and I was producing and reinforcing within myself. As
Hmm.
simple as it is, because I thought all my values stem from me being productive. Even though the context didn't match, I was working 12, 14 hours because of I was in the military. I wasn't working that much intensity, but I still justified it within myself. So there I go back to, why do we do what we do? Why do we care about? So I'm just asking you simply, when it comes to recovery and you're an advocate of it, why do you do what you do, Juliet?
Well, it's a great question. And um, I think it comes from a root of compassion for others.
Hmm.
Um, I I was married almost 13 years to someone who was addicted to cocaine.
Yeah.
And um, although substance use was, that wasn't my drug of choice,
Mm.
it really hurt me to see someone destroy their life, to make choices that were so detrimental physically and financially, emotionally. Um, to be a witness to that was really, really painful. And so I do have a great compassion on those who are chemically dependent. But through that process, initially I thought he was the only one with addiction.
Hmm.
And that wasn't really true, because as I started attending 12-step meetings to support and help him, I realized that I also had addictions. Now they were legal. They
Hmm.
weren't going to
Hmm.
put me in prison, but they were still unhealthy, ways of numbing and
Yeah.
coping with life, coping with the crazy cycle that is being, married to someone who's using something like cocaine.
Hmm.
And so through that experience, even though that marriage ended in divorce, it was born a compassion
Hmm.
for people who are addicted, and especially from my perspective, those who have a loved one, which is
Yeah.
almost everybody nowadays.
Yeah.
And so my book, Same Dress Different Day, my
Yeah.
ministry, um, my speaking engagements, all of that is based on just having a compassion for people who are struggling in this area and wanting to offer them hope that you can survive, you can thrive, you can come through this. It doesn't have to swallow your life.
Yeah. I really like what you said, how you it's not just what you did wrong, because the one thing that bothers me is when we say how wrong a person is, it builds that gap. There's no connective component. At the same time, understanding that our limits, like you said before, we need to set boundaries, healthy ones, loving ones, because the thing is, we needed time for ourselves to process and to heal. This month is, like I said, tribute to suicide prevention
Yes.
week. And I want to also mention that there's this one quote, and it says, "If you want to show me you really love me, don't say you would die for me. Instead, stay alive for me." I feel there's a lot of context. A lot of people you overuse the "I will die for you," like in in the war or situation, certain contexts that could be brave. At the same time, as it could be something, it could be an escape. For us, unfortunately, suicide is more common than we like to admit. So, those who are listening, I just want to share that perspective can make the permanent choice seem more appealing. I want to share briefly, if you are in crisis, again, in the United States, do not hesitate to call 1-800-273-8255. It's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Hope and uncertainty are words that are often embraced to each other. They have to be. If you already know what is to come, then there's no need for the word hope. And I kind of, in my own faith, that is explored even deeper. There's a verse, and I'm going to share. I didn't, and I thought it was very appropriate, and for different reasons. It says, "You" is from Luke 10:28-29. It says, "You have answered rightly. Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself and said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" The parable of the Good Samaritan is always used, especially when it comes to, I think it was at Loma Linda. They have that statue or something. Is that right? Anyway, that one reminder. But I am not even looking at the parable itself or the main lesson, but more what led to the parable itself. The lawyer wanted certainty that he was okay to marginalize those who are not of the fold. It's a haunting reminder of how selfish we can be. But even more interesting, the question I asked you before, and everyone listening, and I'm wording it differently, but just to kind of wrap this tribute and everything, why do we care about suicide prevention, and why do we care about recovery? I know you answer that, but I could go first, and then you could kind of share your bit, and then we'll be kind of wrapping up, Juliet. Um,
Okay.
when it comes to suicide prevention, for me, it's because of the people. It has to be about the people and the families impacted. That is why sometimes we make it so complicated. Not to say it isn't complicated, but the reasons why I care for a lot of these things, because some people that I know are not here anymore. Because I almost made that choice. So, and I think through God's grace, my life was spared. And because if no one was there to call the ambulance, I wouldn't be here. I think it's a lot of times we there's a lot of pain, especially in my new position that I'm in. I see both sides of it, and there is a lot of pain. and there's a lot of healing. And then you kind of see the difference between house and home.
Yes.
And I think the Lord, like many of us, unfortunately, um, we ask that question. Oh, we're not like them. It's we have this us them mentality, but when it comes to recovery, I feel we have to remind ourselves it is messy, but also it also is very connective and can be very healing. And the journey is there's this word called vacilando. My wife is it basically means there's many translations, but really it's throw away the map, embrace the journey, not the destination. A lot of times in recovery we talk about the journey. So Juliet, why, going back to the question, why is suicide prevention, and why do we care? Why do you care? Why do we care about suicide prevention, and why do we care about recovery from your standpoint?
One of the reasons is because I taught elementary school for many years in Title I schools, and I got to see the way that these things affect kids. And it broke my heart because I could see these babies come to school, kids who have lost a parent to suicide, kids who have lost a parent to drug overdose, kids who come from a home where people are using, and the kids are they're not cared for. Their house is definitely not a home, and it's so visible. And it hurts me to see this cycle continue. And I want to make a difference. I see the effect on the people who love people who are addicted, on the people who are left behind when someone takes their own life. And I just feel like if we can talk about it, if we can open the can and have these conversations, and show compassion and love to those who are hurting, we can prevent. And so that's why I really appreciate your podcast, and I like being a guest here, because I feel like you're, one podcast at a time, you're driving this home. It matters. People matter, and there is hope.
Yeah, I for me, when I first, I started doing it in events, and then I, switched over to podcast. And one of the things I wanted to make it is safe. I really thought of it as a true outreach. I would even say a medical outreach. In the aspect that I create a safe place for all of us to continue the dialogue, like you said. It's messy, but I think it gets more for me. It really gets scary for me when people stop talking, when people feel that they can't talk. At least I do appreciate you, Juliet, coming on. But I want to share this one quote and then have you wrap up with any final thoughts. I love this quote. I just found it quite recently. It says, "Leave everything undefined, including yourself. Befriend uncertainty. Fall in love with mystery. Kneel at the altar of not knowing. Give your questions time to breathe, and the answers will find you." It's from Jeff Foster, and I think it's kind of haunting how he presents it, but in a way, at least for me, I think we are sold so quickly, so cheaply, certainty, where we just need to embrace the journey and kind of, at least from my experience, to keep what do you call it? Keep working on those connections that you have, building on the support, positive ones. Ask yourself, reflect on yourself, slow down. It's not just being busy to be busy. It doesn't, our value comes from within, whether you're faith-based or not. That's something, when you put your value in other things, you risk a big disappointment or discouragement. So I do find reflecting, connections, and just I don't know, building on that to be important. What did you, when you hear this quote, what comes to mind?
You know, sometimes we rush things.
Yeah.
We don't give our questions time to breathe.
Yeah.
People have a lot of hurt, a lot of why has this happened to me? Why am I suffering like this?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're around someone who is filled with joy, like
Mm-hmm.
it, you want a
Yeah.
piece of it. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you saw this, but in June of this year on America's Got Talent,
Mm-hmm.
there was an artist. Her name is Nightbird. That's her artist name. Her first name is Jane.
Mm-hmm.
But she sang a song called "It's Okay," and she won the Golden Buzzer. She has so much cancer inside of her that doctors have given her. She said they gave her a 2% chance to live.
Yeah.
And her outlook was just so positive, so powerful. She said, well, 2% isn't nothing.
Yeah.
2% is something.
Yeah.
And she said there are a lot of people who want to hope for something in their life, but they're afraid to.
Mm-hmm.
And this woman has been such an inspiration. She's not afraid to hope. She's not afraid to have joy. She's not afraid to live her life to the fullest, even though she's been given a 2% chance to live because cancer is all over her body. She just says you can't wait until life isn't hard anymore until you decide to be happy. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
choice that we make.
Yeah.
And, we can choose no matter what our circumstance. We can choose. We can choose hope. We can choose joy. And we can
Mm-hmm.
choose to surround ourselves with people who are going to help us attain that.
Thank you, Julia. I want to ask you as we wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity to share. You mentioned your book or any final thoughts you would like to share with those listening. Any information I will put in the notes when this does air. Juliet, wrapping up.
Thank you so much. As I mentioned, my first memoir is Same Dress Different Day, and it's a story of addiction and redemption. It's a story of how God brought me through codependency,
Mm-hmm.
very much a faith story.
Mm-hmm.
And then I recently wrote and published the story of my stepfather.
Mm-hmm.
His book, the book is called As I Walked, and
Mm-hmm.
he struggled with his sexuality
Yeah.
growing up and wanted to end his life.
Yeah.
And he just had a fantastic turnaround and a faith walk with God that I just believe can give so many people hope when they're struggling and in such a dark place.
Yeah.
And so those can be found on Amazon. My ministry is called Relevant Life Solutions, and that's website is relevantlifesolutions.org. And I just thank you again, Robert, for the opportunity to be here and to sow hope in hearts wounded by addiction.
Thank you, Juliet. And everyone who's listening, that will be in the notes so you could find her website and all the books, the 2 books that she mentioned. And thank you, Juliet, so much for agreeing to be a guest with us today. I just want to share with those who are listening to stay updated with Revive Ministry through the various platforms. ReviveMinistriesFL.com is our website. We do have a YouTube channel and Facebook, but they're all linked. You can find it from the website. I just want to say this is goodbye from Revive Ministry Podcast, leaving with this last quote. It says, "Our most basic instinct is not for survival, but for family."